Okay, so quick review of what we've done of Elihu's answer, and then I have a YouTube video to show you that will illustrate it, and then that'll hopefully generate more discussion. So quick review, the concise summary of the answer is study nature, okay? How is that gonna help you deal with or relate to God's, or to your own suffering? So number one, let me hide this here. Number one, first and foremost, it will increase your knowledge of how Hashem manages and supervises the world, which is different than the way we supervise and manage the world, which if I have time, I'm gonna clarify that today. And it makes your expectations more realistic. And the more realistic your expectations are, then the less suffering you will have when things don't go according to your expectations. And in fact, when you expect it to go, like, maybe I didn't give you this analogy already. This would be a good time for the analogy. So you remember, those of you who drove back from Shalhevet on Branch Boulevard, the long thing, and there's a light at the end. I feel like I brought this up. Maybe I did bring this up. Yeah, the one you go around, you know? So like, it always is annoying if you get stuck on that red light, you know, because it was I think it was sometimes it could be a long red light. It depends on when in the past it was. There were times when it used to be a really, really long red light, like I'd be timing it, you know? So the thing is that like, there's one level where you see it's green and you're like driving and you're like, oh no, it's turning red, you know? So obviously if you are a chacham, you will realize that like, oh, of course it's going to turn red if it's been green for a while, you know? So at some point in teaching Iov and thinking about that, I used to, when I would drive around and it would be red, I would get happy because I would know that by the time I got there, it would be green, you know? Was that? No, that was someone else's. Yeah. Okay. So the point is that like, I mean, maybe that's not the best example, but the point is that the more you set your expectations for something to happen, then the less surprised and hurt and disappointed you'll be when it does happen. Okay. And the more you do that with Hashem systems, then the better it'll be. Two is when you realize how good the world is as a whole and how the systems are good, then even when a system doesn't go well for you, then you will not take that personally. That's instead of saying why me, then saying why not me. You know, realizing how how much you benefited from the systems. And we use the traffic system programming and bodily examples. Right. So dying is a good case, right? So that was where we, I mean, it's a good example. Yeah. No, that's why I brought in the example of Rabbi Akiva, because that's like the highest level where even when the system results in your death, then you realize that the system as a whole is good, and that the part of you that's really you is the part of you that knows the system and can appreciate that. And we all die, you know, we all die at some point. So the thought that I think part of why death is such a terrifying thing is because there's part of us that feels like you should be an exception, you know, like, oh, this, you know, how can I ever die? So Rabbi Akiva like accepted his own mortality and had an appreciation of Hashem's system and was able to maintain that in the face of death. And I'm not saying that we can do that. That's a very high level.
No matter how much you strive to know the system, we don't know until it comes to shove.
Yeah, and even Rabbi Akiva didn't know when push came to shove, because that's why he said.
Yeah, that's why I said I'm happy.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay. 3, it increases our worthiness for Hashgacha Pratis, and that will protect us from types 1 and 2. That was the Hashgacha Pratis chart, that the closer you are to Hashem, then the more aspects of your life will be under Hashgacha Pratis, which will save you from bad things and will facilitate good things. And further away you are from Hashem, then the more you'll be under the laws of nature, which is also good, but it's not good in a personally tailored way. It's good in a general way, you know? So I don't think I gave the morbid example. The morbid example is like, you know, if you, maybe I mentioned this in the past, you flip a coin, odds are for heads and tails 50-50, right? So if you are, let's say, over here, you know, distant from Hashem, and you get into a car accident and the car flips, odds are 50-50, okay? If you're here, then you get into a car accident, your car might be destroyed, but it's possible Hashem will protect you from getting severely hurt and you might get scratches. You're over here, Hashem might prevent you from getting hurt at all. If you're over here, like Avraham Avinu, Magin Avraham doesn't get into car accidents. You know, Hashem protects him from even that, you know? What? Well, I don't know at what point in his life he got the level of Magin Avraham, but certainly at the end of his life, you know, like the last leg of his life, I guess Again, I don't know what point, maybe until then, I don't know. Then like he was successful in everything, you know.
How does that work though? Because as we said, everyone's in a physical system.
Right.
In physical things.
So in physical systems, then physical systems will have cases that don't work out for particulars, but that's where hashgacha pratis comes in, because it will save you from from being one of those particulars.
So, like, let's say by the time of Mashiach, and if everyone, this is like, it seems flawed because not everyone, like this would only work if there are only a few people like this.
Well, there's another thing. I hear what you're saying. You're saying because someone has to be a particular.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, someone has to get stopped at the red lights. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Right. That's a good question. So I guess maybe one of the things that will change in the time of Mashiach. Well, okay, several things will change. One is that. Well, actually, let me go back to this thing. Actually, hold on to the question for just until I get the next 2 points. Number 4 is the more you learn about the natural systems, the more it'll enhance your decision making to be able to avoid raw type 2 and raw type 3. You know, to be able to, let's say, like raw type 2. You know, to let's say, you know, there were unfortunately there were lots of Jews in Europe when things were starting to get bad, and not everyone could have left, but there were Jews who could have left, but they misassessed the situation and decided to stay, and that led to them getting killed in the Holocaust. You know, so the more you understood the systems of human psychology and politics and all that stuff, and like practicality, the more you'd be able to save yourself from those types of things that are in your control. And then type 3 is the more you understand about nutrition, the more you'll save yourself from, you know, diseases that come from bad nutrition. The more you understand about like parenting, the more you'll save yourself from like the bad effects of bad parenting on your kids. You know, there's Mishlei, okay? And then number 5 is the more you involve yourself in knowledge, the more your own value system will evolve to the point where you don't measure good and bad by what happens to your possessions, your body, or your emotions, but you'll measure it by what happens to your ability to choose good and to seek knowledge and to live in line with Hashem's will. And then you won't be bothered by lots of things that people are bothered by. That's the example of the old guy who was, you know, suffering, and someone and you know, person was told, oh, go to talk to that guy to see, you know, to understand the answer to Tzaddik Varalo. And the suffering guy, you know, the guy who looked like he was suffering said, oh, you know, why did they send you here? Like, I'm not suffering, you know, because he was not attached to his physicality in the same way. So the question you were asking about in the time of Mashiach, right? So it's true that in the time of Mashiach, you can't get rid of entropy, right? But you can diminish, you can still moderate, our expectations will be much more realistic, so we won't suffer from being those red light cases. We won't feel victimized by it because we'll understand our place in the goodness of the Hashem system. We will max out, so to speak, hashgacha pratis in terms of God will be helping us to the maximum degree possible in a physical world. Okay, so for example, God is not going to stop aging, like the process of human aging, right? But sicknesses and stuff like that will be protected from. We will make better decisions and avoid things that could have harmed us. And our value system will be such that we won't be bothered by the red light cases in the same way that we would have before. So in Mashiach, it's not going to save us from all types of Ra, but it will be severely dialed down in terms of the suffering that we have from that.
So do you think, based on that, like, are you making a distinction between pain and suffering?
Yes, I am.
Then why can't the whole answer boil down to that? Like, why can't, once you're like saying, oh, Iov just felt pain, not suffering, why can't you just say, everyone who, like you said, like, a lot of bad things happen, but that's just pain and you deal with it.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, that's Rabbi Lax's answer. Rabbi Lax's answer, which again, we're going to plan to go through on Thursday, puts the entire answer to Sefer Iyov in number 5. That's the teaser. Okay. Yeah.
I think each of them on their own could be like
yes, I think so also. And I put them all, like I'm saying, like my job is to present to you whatever I have. Mm-hmm. And like I sense that each of these 5 is different enough that it's worth listing. But I think they all contribute to the answer, and I haven't found a 6th, you know.
And I think each on their own though, like some of them on their own, you can just take that. And
yes, definitely, yeah. And that's why I think it's powerful if you think about each of these 5 points. Depending on where you are in life and like how bad the thing is that you're suffering, you'll this is like your toolkit, you know, your toolkit for like dealing with suffering. And well, I'm not saying it's so easy to just deal with suffering, but like in life, like keeping these 5 points in mind, and will help with these. Yeah.
Do you like explain how it's a consequence of study nature?
Mm-hmm. Because the criterion for closeness to Hashem is the more you perfect yourself intellectually, which means the more you use your mind to seek knowledge according to the tools available to you, then the more you're under God's hashgacha pratis, you know. So, and the more you know about reality as well. Yeah. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Mrs. Fader and Rav Hirsch and Shadal have a different idea of what we mean by intellectual perfection, you know. But you know, this is according to the Rambam. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I wish I knew how long to wait for Ayala because we have a video and I don't want her to miss the video. So we'll stall for a little while. Well, okay, I'll lead into the question really slowly, okay? So these 3 points, there's an objection that someone can make, okay? So the point about realistic expectations, feeling victimized, and then decision-making, okay? So someone could say, really? I don't buy it. Understanding the systems of nature can't make that much of a difference in how we suffer, can it? Okay, that's like a Ben Russia type question. Not that you're a Russia if you ask this. I'm saying like a sarcastic way of asking it. So the answer is yes, it can. Okay, and I want to show you an example, and this has to do, ironically, with wolves. But not. I found this like 6 or 7 years ago. This is not like from my recent wolf thing. Okay, but it does have to do with wolves. Let's give her 1 more minute.
Formulated question.
Sure. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
So like, let's say you say the pain and suffering thing.
Yeah.
Or even just like according to most of these, it still, maybe we already listed this question, but it still seems like you're like diminishing hashgacha.
Diminishing hashgacha pratis or klawus? Pratis. How so?
Because like if all these things are true and like this is the way to do better, and I feel like I have this question with tefillah too.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to just think of these ideas, but then also on the same time ask Hashem to do something specifically for me on my little tiny.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing, and I'm struggling with this as well. Is I feel like the more you understand about God's systems, the more your bakashos will be like. Let's say the reverse. The less your bakashos will be asking for special treatment. You know, I feel like that's just because the like let's say for example, I'll say this like in a this might not be the best example, but like let's say like if you know nothing about the human body and you're sick, you'll just ask Hashem to miraculously heal you. But let's say the more you understand about the human body and the more you realize how God designed the human body to heal itself, the more you'll just be asking God to like facilitate the processes that he designed in the human body in an effective way, you know? And then it is hashgacha, but I'm trying to differentiate between, let's say like the most basic level is you ask for a miracle. Then you're asking for intervention in like the natural processes to facilitate them, you know, like a Nace Nister type thing, you know? And then the question is like, eventually, like, does the highest level person just ask for God's will to be fulfilled? And then like with the highest, I always wonder this, with the Shemona Esrei, would the highest level person not put in bakashos in the Shemona Esrei, personal bakashos, because they'd realize it's all covered and they would relate to it the same way that we relate to our personal bakashos?
That's kind of denying.
It's not denying it. It what it's doing is it's recognizing how much good there is in hashgacha klawus that you wouldn't even need the hashgacha pratis. Like say for example in Mitzrayim, you know, God. That's not it either. God needed to. That's the class of 2019 because I told them what the video I'm going to show you today, and they're all excited about it. I was going to say that, like in Mitzrayim, God needed to part the Yam Suf, right? Because that was the only way to deal with the situation of the Mitzrayim chasing them. If it wasn't necessary for him to do that, he wouldn't have done it. Right now, that's not degrading hashgacha pratis. That's saying that everything about the way God created the world and Moshe's leadership and all that was enough. God didn't need to. Do we ever use the? Okay, there we go. Good. All right, we weren't sure how long to wait, and I didn't want to start the video yet. The muscle of the tapestry and the spilled grape juice. So imagine you. This is from Rabbi Fox. So imagine you have a tapestry, you know what a tapestry is? like, right? So tapestry hanging in your dining room, and then let's say it's a Shabbos meal and someone spills the grape juice, right? And the only thing you have to wipe it up is the tapestry, right? So you'll wipe it up, but you'll probably wipe it up with the part of the tapestry that is purple to mask the color, and you'll probably do it if you could on a place where no one's going to see it, So like the nimshal is God doesn't want to mess up the tapestry of nature, right? Nature is the system where you really see the glorious system of Hashem. And that's why God is reluctant, so to speak, to do miracles. And when he does do miracles, he does it in the most minimal and the most hidden way possible, So if God had his choice, so to speak, which obviously he does, but he would never do miracles. Nature would be sufficient. The only problem is that nature can't be perfect because there are always going to be particulars that don't work out. And those are the cases in the Torah where we see that he did use miracles. So I don't think it's that much of a thing in our tefillah that obviously we are still supposed to ask Hashem for whatever we want, because it's really up to him for how he intervenes. It's not our job to figure out how to do it, but it's not a bad thing if God would address our tefillahs through hashgacha klalis, and it's definitely not a bad thing if we align our desires for that. The only bad thing would be if we denied hashgacha pratis.
But also, like, on the one hand, Hashem values, so to speak, and created a perfect system.
Yeah.
And we each fit into that as like just one little part of the system.
Right.
But on the other hand, like Abraham had Magen Abraham, and Abraham was his own individual, and Hashem cares about the individual.
Right.
So based on what you're saying, that makes sense. Like if you're just concerned about the system and the system functioning properly, then yeah, you just say Hashem's will. But when you're talking about yourself, like everything that's good for the system may not be good for you. So you would want what's good for you and the system.
Right. But here's the other interesting thing, and this I'm also not sure about, but I can definitely tell you in the case of Abraham and Moshe, the higher level of an individual you become, the more the good of you is the good of the system, because that's what you want and it affects the system. Like in Abraham's case, it literally produced the system. Right? Is that God, the highest level of hashgacha was God said, I will make your offspring into a nation that carries on these values. And in Moshe's case, God didn't make a nation out of Moshe, but whatever happens to Moshe affects the entire system.
Right. Is that just a natural consequence? Like, is that always when you're on a higher level, it will affect the system more, or it has to go hand in hand in order to get a shachar?
Good question. This is kind of one of the main reasons I'm learning Tehillim now, because I feel like Tehillim is really where it answers those questions. But these are good questions about hashgacha that will hopefully be investigating for a long time. Okay, so let me show you this video, and only because I don't know. This is Ed. Okay. Okay, so another ad. Okay, well, you know what I'm going to do? Because I'm always paranoid that it'll get like taken down because of copyright issues, and I don't know about this. I'm going to pause the recording now. Hold on, resume recording. Okay, so hold on just one second. Let me share the PowerPoint again. Okay, so first of all, they forgot to mention two facts in here. So they mentioned that wolves had been absent from Yellowstone for 70 years. Okay, I believe that's because the United States government, and whoever's in charge of the parks, exterminated the wolves. Was it? No, I think they killed them. Yeah, I think they killed all of them. I think they thought that it was causing harm, and that was another mistake having to do with wolves, is because they didn't realize this, and then all this bad stuff started happening in the park. So that was one fact, and then the other fact is they kept on alluding to how a few wolves were reintroduced. I think it was something like 7 or like 15 wolves were introduced into the park, and then that did all of this, So here's the application. So Yellowstone is an example of a system, or if you want to say, it's one ecosystem, but there are obviously many subsystems in there. Okay, we humans, dumb humans, arrogant humans, didn't understand the system, and so we didn't understand how everything was interconnected. Okay, and they didn't even know the concept of ecosystem back then, which is crazy. Okay, now imagine if we understood all systems. Okay. We would see how each system is perfectly designed to produce the maximum good for the system as a whole and for every part of it. And we would see how we're the ones messing things up. And then we wouldn't blame Hashem because we'd recognize that Hashem set everything up to work perfectly. And it's our privations, like the Rambam says, is ignorance, really, which makes us make bad decisions, which makes us perceive things in a distorted way, which makes us act on our Yetzer Hara to like actively like harm things, you know? So like, imagine in the human body is a system, okay? And there's so many diseases that we have, but what moves are we making in terms of the way we live that are equal to like taking wolves out of Yellowstone? You know, like if we really understood, I'll give you an example of this. There's a lot of studies coming out now on. Oops, sorry, hold on. This is still. Just change this here back. There is there. Have you ever heard talk recently about inflammation as a problem in the body? I don't even exactly know what it is. I know it's something that the body does, but there are like all of these things, these studies that are showing how like this one problem of inflammation in the body results in tons and tons of like completely like seemingly unrelated medical conditions. And they're finding that like certain foods that we eat, lead to higher instances of inflammation. And so it could be something as very simple as just like a slight change in our diet could have this trophic cascade effect on our entire thing. Or let's say like there have been situations like this in cities and in like city economics where like certain little changes that they made resulted in like, completely like eliminating like traffic problems and like pollution and all this, we're so ignorant about systems that if we really just understood them, then we would recognize that we are the ones who are withholding a lot of the natural good that is in these systems. And think about Torah. I mean, Torah is a system that is designed for our success. And how much of Torah are we keeping? Not that much, We're not keeping that much as a nation because there are many mitzvahs we can't do. And then on an individual level, there's so many averos that we're doing and so many things that we're not keeping Torah properly. If we were to keep Torah properly, how different would our lives be, But instead, what do? Is we just experience all this stuff, we suffer, and then we just blame God for giving us the short end of the stick, but it really, I think there's if we really saw things clearly, we would see how much we're responsible for this.
I didn't say anything. Okay. This only explains what was it, the third type?
So to me, this video is relevant to 1, 2, and 4.
The types of harm.
Oh, the types of harm, yeah. Raw type 2 and 3, yeah.
That's what humans cause.
That's what humans cause to each other and to ourselves.
Yeah, we already know. What about the type 1 harms? This isn't.
No, but I think there's lots of stuff that we classify as type 1 that really is type 2 and 3. Meaning it stems from the physical world, but it stems from the way that we engage the physical world,
Are there any things which are just type 1?
Yeah, like there is the phenomenon of entropy that things do wear down.
Yeah.
But how much of think of, so let's say like we will age and we will die. Like that's why the Rambam emphasizes that, again, this is Machlokas Ramban and Rambam. Rambam says even in Yemos Mashiach, we're going to die. But he says lives will be extremely long. Why? Because we won't be doing anything that is, we'll have all the knowledge to be able to live healthy lives. We'll be psychologically healthy, so we won't have all of the effects of like stress and all that other stuff. And we won't be injuring each other and causing stuff through environmental things. So like, that's what I'm saying, like in an ideal situation where we had full knowledge, or as full knowledge as we can, then yeah, we would eventually die, but we would suffer very little of like many other things, and even stuff, let's say like earthquakes, so you have an earthquake in a third world country and it completely destroys the entire everything. You have earthquakes in America that have infrastructure built up based on science with buildings that like react properly, and like you have some damage, but you don't have like widespread death. Now, why is that? Because we studied nature and we are increasing technology to be able to like align ourselves with our knowledge of like what, of how the earth works. And that allows us to avert lots of disasters. So earthquake is type 1, but because of but when we gain knowledge, then we can use type 3 and type 2 techniques and strategies to like minimize the damage from type 1.
Why would like if Hashem's system is so perfect,
Yeah.
why should we intervene and try to innovate? And
So the short answer to that question is that's my understanding of what Adam was charged with when he was put in Gan Eden, La'avda U'Lashamra, to watch it and guard it. And that was part of the commandment that Hashem, or the instruction Hashem gave him to rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and all that other stuff. There is a certain, for lack of a better term, like a custodianship role that God put us on earth and then gave us the tools to perfect things through our Tzelem Elohim. Why he did that, I don't know, and what the extent of that is, I don't know. But that's like the short reference to the answer. If you have more questions, I just want to go through one more quick idea just to tie this up today, so we don't leave it for tomorrow. So if you've heard the expression "Gamzu Latova," right, which literally means, yeah, this too is for the good, right? I think people in English, they say everything is for the good, right? Which is a similar idea. So the Kuzari has an explanation of Gamzu Latova, which is very in line with Iov and very in line with this idea. And it's radically different. What types of situations do people use Gamzu Latova in? Like, give me a...
getting a parking ticket.
Yeah, getting a parking ticket, okay, right? And then, oh, this is for the good, right? Now, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying that that's not what the Kuzari is going to say. Here's what he says. The highly perfected person instills in his heart the conviction that all of God's acts are just, so that his beliefs act as a shield and refuge in relation to the afflictions and tragedies that occur in the world. How so? One accomplishes this by pondering the way God treats all creatures justly and how he provides for them and guides them wisely. Although no one can comprehend the details, we can nevertheless appreciate the generalities of the system. And when he says you can't comprehend the details, it's going to be clear that he means you can't comprehend all the details, because he's going to give a bunch of examples from details. We see how perfectly structured all creatures are, and we see the wondrous phenomena which reflect upon the intent of he who is wise, desirous, omniscient, and omnipotent. God has provided for the needs of each creature, small and large alike, in the way of instincts, sensory perception, internal organs, and limbs, and has in turn provided each with equipment that is appropriate to the creature's makeup. For example, God gave hyenas a ferocious temperament and the means to maul and tear. He gave the rabbit and the doe means to run swiftly, along with timid temperament. When one ponders the creation of these limbs, their benefits, and their relation to the nature of the animal, he will note the justice and wise order of the system. This will remove any doubts about God's justice. How so? Okay. If an argument arises from within him that it is unjust that the rabbit should be prey of the hyenas or that the fly is the prey of the spider, let his intellect take control and rebuke him. Let it say, how can I attribute an injustice to the wise God after I have already established his justice? After all, God does not need these injustices for his own sake. If the fact that the hyenas hunt rabbits and spiders and flies were mere coincidence, I would have argued that it is all arbitrary. But instead, I see that it is the wise God who righteously guides creation, who placed the faculties and the tools of hunting within the lion, such as ferocity, agility, teeth, and claws. It is God who gave the spider the instinctive cunning to weave its web and trap the fly. God also gave the spider the tools needed for this task, and he specified the fly as food for the spider. God did the same for fish by designating certain fish as food for other fish. I cannot suggest anything except that this is a branch of wisdom I do not comprehend. I therefore must justify the one who is called the rock, whose acts are perfect. So far, he's just talking about nature, but now he says, Nachum Ish Gamzu is an example of a person who was able to establish this conviction in his heart. Whenever tragedy would befall him, he would say, Gamzu Latova, this too is for the good. The life of such a person is always pleasant, and suffering is light in his eyes. He may even rejoice in it, very similar to what the Rambam said, if he considers the sins he has committed. He then looks upon, meaning he'll say that I'm getting all this benefit even though I committed sins and I'm not worthy. He then looks upon the suffering with the eyes of someone who has just paid a debt and is joyfully relieved by having his burden removed. He rejoices in the reward and recompense that await him. He is also happy about his ability to teach others how to endure suffering and justify God's decrees, and he rejoices in the good name and the great honor that he acquires because of these attributes. So on the surface, it sounds like he pulled a fast one on us, because people think of Gamzu Latova as like, I got a parking ticket. Maybe God was trying to stop me from spending that $60 on like, something that would harm me, and that's why, and they come up with all of these like particularized, like God sending me a message type thing. That's clearly not the way the Kuzari is learning it. He's saying, if you study nature, you see that everything God does everywhere else in the universe is perfectly just. And although you can't explain why that particular spider ate that particular fly, you see that the system as a whole is good, and he gave the spider species everything it needs, and the fly species everything it needs, and everything exists in a perfect balance in a circle of life. So then when you see the human realm and you're like, it doesn't make sense to me why this happened to me, if you have this same perspective, you'll realize that there is a system that God has that regulates all of human affairs, and that although you can't understand the particulars, the system as a whole is good and just. And the only difference is that in the natural world, God is completely in charge of those systems. Whereas for us, it's a partnership, meaning we can't affect the systems that govern our body are like automatic, like we don't control gravity, you don't control like, your heart beating. So that part is in God's hands, so to speak, but he did give us the system of the Torah and charge us with keeping it in order to have a good life. And we do have responsibility for that,
We do affect our natural body and how things
Right. So because we have free will, then we can. So what I meant is we don't control the implementation of the laws, but we do control how we interact with those laws. Meaning you can't control gravity, but you can decide to not try to fly,
No, but you can control your heart's not going to start racing if you don't go for a run. You can
Right. That's what I meant. You're not controlling the laws. You're controlling how you interact with the laws and how the laws interact with you. Yeah. And that's a good point. Also, that relates to what we said before as well. Yeah.
Kind of like a while ago.
Sure.
If the Torah is a system that you truly reap benefits from when you completely are keeping it properly.
Yeah.
No one will ever keep it completely properly. And how do you know that it's actually going to benefit you if you're constantly messing it up? So you don't know, and you're obviously getting pain and suffering in your life. So
yeah.
How do you know that if you keep it properly, that it will actually
good question.
benefit you?
So there are two ways we know, and I'm just answering this in the 2 minutes we have. So, no, that's fine. We can continue discussing next time. But one way is that if you hold by Torah Sinai, then God emphasizes this point a lot, and we can rely on the fact that God designed the human body and the Torah and knows what He's talking about. But that's just relying on the authority. Okay. The other thing is there are two types of systems. Okay, or the two qualities of systems. There are systems that I'm going to call this that are resilient, and there are systems that are not. I wouldn't think it's the same thing, but resilient, by resilient, I mean that you can damage them a lot, but they will still have beneficial effects, not the maximum ones. And then the systems that are not, again, using programming language, certain programs, if you change one thing, the whole thing doesn't work, So thankfully, Torah is a very resilient system where, like I said, we are keeping a very small percentage of the mitzvos as a nation now. And as individuals, we are also keeping things in a really bad way. But the nature of the Torah is such that the more you keep it, the more you see the benefits of keeping it. Like those who live a life of revolves around learning, they see how much it affects them. Those who keep Shabbos properly, not just not doing malacha, but create the atmosphere of Shabbos and the values of Shabbos, you get to experience how beneficial Shabbos is on so many levels. And the fact that let's say in my personal case, I've seen so much how I benefit from this mitzvah and that mitzvah and that mitzvah. And I've seen that the more I keep the mitzvah properly and the more I learn about it, the more benefit I get. So that itself gives me a firsthand conviction that this must be true for all the other mitzvahs that I'm not keeping properly, Yeah. Okay, let's stop here for today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.